So welcome everyone. This is our second UHS Unionville High School College Planning webinar. I'm Bob Findora. I'm one of the school counselors over at the high school. We will be joined here tonight by a few college admissions reps. We'll get started here in a minute. Okay, as I can see some of the participants pouring in. I really appreciate the participation by our community here tonight. It's a great opportunity for all of you to be able to ask some questions and get some answers here tonight. And we have some great individuals lined up for tonight and some really nice topics that we get a lot of questions from parents in the counseling center. So I'll give it another minute here and then we'll get started. Okay. So I'd like to give everybody just a brief overview. I know a few of the parents typically ask me questions in these college webinar series that we run from the high school counseling department. We cannot see you. You do have availability to be able to ask questions at the bottom of your screen. You should see the chat or Q&A there. You can enter questions into that, and then we'll be able to see them and ask our participants here from the different colleges that we have tonight. Also, I'd like you to know that this presentation is being recorded, so we'll be putting that up on the Counseling Center website. Usually we give it a few days, almost a week here, and we'll be able to turn that over and get it up on the website also. Tonight's topics, we have some very, very interesting topics. We have test optional and SAT, ACT, and standardized testing from that standpoint for college admissions process. And we have Sean Abbott from Tulane tonight. Next, the second topic of the night we'll move into eventually will be writing the college essay, and we have Samantha Murray here from University of South Carolina, and she'll be discussing again writing the college essay. And then we'll be able to finish the night up with Katrina Kelly from Westchester University and a presentation on financial aid, and that'll be the last topic for tonight. So before I get started, as I always do with these college webinars, I have a lot of people to thank for participation, let alone the community and all of you participating tonight. I'd really like to thank Justin Webb. He's our tech guru behind the scenes, and he sets all of this up and has all of this and puts a lot of time in to make sure these things run smoothly from a technology standpoint. I'd like to thank Melissa Albrand. She's one of our other counselors that are also here behind the scenes. That's actually helping to filter some of the questions as they come into the chat. And I'd also like to thank our participants tonight, Sean, Katrina, and Samantha. I mean, without them and their knowledge base, these type of webinars and getting answers to a lot of the questions wouldn't be able to happen. So also, last point before I start to really get things started here with our first topic, I'd also like to let everyone know that when it comes to the recordings here, we'll be bouncing around to the different participants. Each participant will typically be on here for about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. And at the end of their presentation is when we typically start to ask them questions before we move on to the next topic. But again, thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to start things off here. I'm very fortunate to work in the past with Sean Abbott. He's over at Tulane. And our first topic for tonight is going to be discussing test optional, SAT, ACT, how things have changed since the pandemic. Sean, I know you are a wealth of knowledge here, and I know you've seen a lot over the years here. If you don't mind giving just a little bit of background on yourself before we kind of jump into things, that'd be a big help. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. So thanks for having me tonight. My name is Sean Abbott. I'm the Dean of Admission down here at Tulane University in New Orleans. It is actually the day after Mardi Gras here in the city of New Orleans. I actually live right here in the French Quarter, which is the map behind me. So Happy Ash Wednesday, I guess, the day after Mardi Gras.
Yep.
I'm relatively new to Tulane. I'm not a native Philadelphian, but I did actually move from Greater Philadelphia or Philadelphia proper down to New Orleans before I came to Tulane. I was the vice provost for enrollment management at Temple University, and I actually started my career in alumni relations at Drexel University, also in Philadelphia. And in between my time at Drexel, I've served in a variety of different capacities in college admissions at Boston University, Columbia University, Stanford University, NYU, and again, right before I came to Tulane, I was in Philly at Temple University for the last 5 years or so.
Yep.
So that's, a little bit about me. I graduated from 2 public flagship universities. I have degrees from the University of New Hampshire and the University of South Carolina, who you will be hearing from in a few minutes,
Yep.
and also did a doctoral program at Columbia University in New York City.
Great.
So that's a little bit about me, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit about the world of test optional admission, or just kind of the current landscape of standardized testing and how that relates to the college admission process.
Yep.
And maybe we'll open up the floor to questions before I turn things over to
thanks,
my.
Sean. I appreciate that.
Cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, I mean, I could start and I could jump right in talking about standardized testing and the role that standardized testing has on college admissions, or we could talk about like any number of variables or topics that are related to college admissions, things like extracurricular impact, essays, interviews, letters of recommendation, talent in the arts or athletics, and we could talk about anything, including testing. But I think the one thing that I would want to underscore before I jump into talking about standardized testing is that across all the college universities that I've represented, I'm 52 and I've been doing this work since I was 24, and across all the college universities that I've represented before, the one constant or the one consistent theme across all of those universities is that there is nothing more important in the college admission process than and I'm speaking more directly to students right now, than your academic record. I mean, that is unequivocally going to be the most important part of your college admission process. Your grades in high school, your courses that you choose to take, your course selection in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, your math preparation, your preparation in the physical sciences, your foreign language acquisition, all that kind of stuff that appears on your high school transcript, it's absolutely going to be the driving force in your options of where you can go to college when you start your first year. That's just remarkably consistent across all the universities that I've represented, whether they're universities that have had single-digit admit rates or universities that can admit the majority of students who apply. Your academic record is unequivocally going to be the most important part of this process.
Yeah,
even
Sean,
though,
that's a great point. I have parents ask me all the time about what does the holistic viewpoint look like for college admissions, and we have 3 very different universities here tonight, and each of you can speak to that. But one of the few starting points that I always say is, particularly, we have these junior planning conferences that we run with a lot of the juniors, and typically a lot of the families and parents and students are there with us as counselors. And I always typically start with that transcript. It's that holistic view of their academics from what they started high school with to where they are now. And there's always other pieces that I go into, but I'm happy you brought that up to start off here, because that is a starting piece for that. I have students that have extremely high SAT, ACT scores, but I always start to let them know, don't think just because of this piece that's extremely high, they're not looking at what you've done for the last essentially 3 years, if that makes sense.
it does. I mean, it's where we spend the majority of our evaluative time. When an admission officer begins to read your application, of course, they're going to be curious about what you have to write about, what you've done outside the classroom, and they're going to want to read your letters of recommendation and maybe an interview evaluation if a university has something like that. And certainly coaches are going to be involved if you have athletic talent, and certainly faculty members are going to be involved in evaluating your talent in the arts. But the majority of the evaluative time is spent on reviewing what you did 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and through whatever we have access to in your senior year at the point of your application, and really doing a deep dive into your academic record. And it's not just about your grade point average or your class rank, if your school provides us with a rank. It's really about really doing a complete deep analysis of all 4 years, all the courses that you chose to take, all of the grades that you received, any kind of patterns that you have, any kind of upward trajectory, or maybe not a positive trajectory over the course of 4 years. Like, that's going to drive the bulk of the college admission process. But that said, I know people get really sweaty about standardized testing, and I would say, that's probably the beauty of being an applicant for college admission in the year 2023 or 2024, as opposed to like when I applied to colleges and universities back in 1988. If you didn't want to submit the results of either the SAT or the ACT to any particular college, you were really restricted to at the time, maybe 20, 25 colleges in America didn't require standardized testing. And for the most part, 20, 30, 40 years ago, the only colleges that didn't require standardized testing were small liberal arts colleges, largely in New England.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to go outside of New England, or if you wanted to go to a large public university, or if you wanted to go to a selective private university, that wasn't an option. You had to submit the results of the SAT or the ACT to just minimally be qualified for admission, to be considered before an admission officer would even open up your application. Yes. And so if there was one bright spot through the pandemic of COVID-19, it was really the eradication of standardized testing being a requirement at most college universities. Now, there's still some college universities that do require either the SAT or the ACT. They're largely, I would say, specialty institutions, institutions like MIT that are really focused in the areas of science and technology and engineering and math. You have a few, but not many, public university systems, the state of Florida, the state of Georgia. Those public university systems require the results of the SAT or the ACT. And then there are a very, very, very small number of what I would consider to be generalist private research universities. Places like Georgetown University do require the SAT or the ACT, but it's a relatively tiny percentage of all the college universities in America. They're about somewhere between, in any given year, 3,500 to 4,000 college universities in America. And I would say, fewer than a quarter of the college universities, in fact, far fewer than a quarter of the universities in America are now requiring the results of the SAT or the ACT. And I think it's a safe assumption that you can make that standardized testing is not coming back as a requirement anytime soon. And I say that not really with a crystal ball or really any evidence, but I say that because I know that most college universities, for the most part, really don't want to put obstacles or roadblocks in front of students that are not there now. So you typically, when a college university has become accustomed to an applicant pool of whatever size it has, and they are able to admit a class using the information that they have, they typically don't like to introduce something that makes it more difficult for a student to apply. I mean, for no other reason than they don't want to see fewer students apply. And if you were to reintroduce the results or reintroduce a requirement like the SAT or the ACT into any particular college university's admission requirements, you would see a suppression in application volume at that college university. And there aren't many institutions that want to do that. My own institution as well. So when I have conversations with our president and our provost, who is our chief academic officer, who asked me about the SAT or the ACT becoming a requirement again, I ask them if they're okay if I deliver them fewer students who apply for admission next year. And the answer is typically no. They don't want to see a smaller applicant pool. I mean, that's typically not something that a college university wants. So I think you can make the safe assumption that SAT and ACT requirements are not coming back anytime soon.
Yeah, Sean, that's a really interesting perspective. I don't think we've talked about that quite as much in the past in these webinars. The fact that, like you said, not trying to predict the future for every single institution in the country, but just that idea that you individuals as these admissions reps, you're presenting that to the table of, if we're adding one more hurdle to jump over here, it's going to fluctuate the numbers here. And Sean, you've talked about this in years past when we've worked together, how competitive it can be from institution to institution. The last thing you want to see is a drop in numbers. So that's a really interesting perspective, for our community to hear there about big picture and maybe in the future, especially for some of our parents, that have multiple children in the school system here, that's the outlook moving forward, because we've already started, and as counselors at the high school, getting bombarded by, hey, we're already test optional for next year. We're already disclaiming we're test optional for the following year. I mean, I've had a few institutions declaring they're test optional for our 10th graders now. I mean, it's like you said, it's really something that they're trying to put at ease. So I'm happy you brought that up, Sean.
And I think folks are only hesitant to make more declarative statements about being test optional indefinitely, because we all want to see what everybody else is doing. So everybody is afraid to kind of call the kind of game too prematurely, so to speak. So, but if I'm a voting man, I would bet my life that, or if I was a betting man, I would bet my life that most college universities are going to remain test optional. I mean, I think once you saw universities like the University of Chicago and places like GW and Trinity College in Connecticut, and then public universities like Temple. When those universities went test optional even prior to the pandemic and demonstrated that they could find students who apply for admission and who could admit a class, they really demonstrated to everybody else that you don't need SAT scores or ACT scores to bring in a class. That said, if I were a 9th grader, if I were a 10th grader, if I were 11th grade, I would still take one of these examinations, and I'd probably take one of these examinations, meaning the SAT or the ACT, twice, because I don't know that you can really make a judgment about whether or not you have good scores after taking the exam just once. But, I would still probably take these exams because, as a 9th grader, you don't know that you're not going to be interested in MIT or Georgetown or the University of Georgia or Florida State University. So you don't want to restrict your options by not taking these exams because some universities are going to require them. And quite frankly, if you do well, scores can improve your chances for admission at institutions that you may choose to apply to. So, and I say certain scores. So if a student is applying to a college university and they have scores that are well above the average for that particular college university, that might work to their advantage. Now, it's a beautiful thing that you can still apply to a large number of college universities and you can not show them your scores, so they don't know anything about your scores. So they're going to focus on all the other areas of your application and making an admission decision. But if you do take any one of these examinations and you find that your scores are well above the average student who's applying to that particular university, that could be something that could improve your chances for admission. Now, just taking the scores and submitting them to all the college universities that you're applying to is not an appropriate strategy because your scores might be below average or average for the college universities that you might be applying to. And just taking the exams and submitting those exams to the universities that you're applying to is not a smart strategy. You definitely have to have a thoughtful conversation with your college counselor to gauge whether or not it's going to be in your best interest to submit scores. I mean, you might decide to take the SAT or the ACT or both. And ultimately, you might decide you're not going to submit your scores to any place because maybe your scores aren't above average at any of the college universities that you want to apply to. So, my short advice would be take one of the exams, the SAT or the ACT, think about taking one of those exams a second time to see if your scores have improved, and then kind of call it a day. Really kind of focus on all the other things that you can focus on. Things like, going home and doing your calculus homework or getting involved in clubs and organizations in a meaningful way, and focus on your, whatever it is that's important to you, whether it's the arts or sports or student government or community service or your part-time job. That's probably going to be where I would focus your time and attention, not hyper-fixating on standardized testing.
Sure.
So what else can I help with?
Yeah, so Sean, we got, so I have a couple questions here for you. That's a great overview, and I really appreciate that. Sean, I get the question a lot here. And I think there's that kind of old school myth about the SATs were essentially only in certain parts of the country, and the SATs are another. Do schools? We have a question here in the chat about, do schools value one more than the other? How do they look at that?
I don't know of any university, any college in America that could care less. I mean, we have a very simple concordance table that kind of cross-references what a score would be if you took a different exam. Like, we're all well versed in making decisions based on either exam.
Now, with that being said, Sean, and I get this question a lot too. It's not 100% exact. So some students and parents really fixate on that. What if a student's SAT and ACT score are fairly similar, and they're almost clearly right around the same ballpark when it comes to that equivalency? Would you recommend sending one, the other? Would you recommend sending both? I mean, what does that look like?
I don't think it's going to matter much.
Yeah.
I mean, I think colleges, universities, like this idea that a college university is going to be more enamored with you because you have a 33 versus a 33 on the ACT, or if you have a 1370 versus a 1380 on the SAT. I mean, it's not going to be that granular. Like, it's likely going to come down to, it's not that the higher score in each of those settings is not more desirable. It's rarely going to come down to 10 points or 1 point on the ACT. It's not, your admission decision is likely not going to be that finite.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you bring that up, Sean. I have a lot of families that I meet with, over the years, and they're always asking me, similar to what you're saying. Do we take the SATs once? Do we take it twice? What does that look like? Sean, are you if you're familiar a little bit, can you speak a little bit about that concept of super scoring and what that looks like, and that being the advantage of taking it more than one time for the SAT in particular?
So most, not all, there are going to be some institutions that are going to want to see, if you've taken the SAT or the ACT, they're going to want to see all of your testing examinations. But there are some, I would say most institutions, if you're submitting the SAT, they're going to take your highest math and they're going to take your highest critical reading or your highest writing, whatever they call that other exam these days. And for the ACT, more and more institutions now will take the highest sitting of your ACT.
Yep.
And by different sections. So I would say most college universities want to look at your SAT or ACT examinations and create the highest possible score they can for you based on whatever you have submitted. And it's, relatively automatic on our end. We have technology that enables us to kind of bring in your scores from the various testing agencies, or a lot of universities will allow you to self-report your scores. And we're able to bring in that data and recompute a new score for you based on the highest score that we can create for you. I mean, we want to do everything that we can to help you marshal your best case forward. But, I don't know. If I were starting this process all over again, I wouldn't take either of these examinations more than twice. I mean, there might be a rare occasion where maybe a third setting.
Yeah.
If you're really seeing dramatic improvement between that first setting and that second setting, and you really think that third setting, you can see continued dramatic improvement.
Yeah.
Great. But I mean, taking any of these exams more than a third time is just a colossal waste of money, time, effort that could be spent in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point, Sean. And I have a lot of families that ask me about, what does that time frame look like? What does that timeline look like of when do we take these tests? Again, just so our community understands, this is it's hard for us to have these very specific conversations in these college webinars. We try to address the foundational information to get, a lot of basic information out to our families. But, Sean, I see a lot of families, essentially a lot of the students are taking the SATs, twice, as you mentioned. They typically take it in March of their junior year. Usually there's a May and a June test for that second one. But to your point, it's rare that I see too many students taking it a third time. I think statistics pretty much show that you're not going to sway things too much. Our students that take the ACT are typically taking it maybe in April, because there's not an SAT in April. So they usually take the ACT maybe in April. If not, some of them like to take it in July before their senior year for the ACT, because there's no SAT in July. So they gear towards that. But one thing I'm always talking to the families about is just really being aware of kind of the differences between the two tests a little bit. There's that small science component to the ACT that the SAT does not have, and the ACT is a little faster paced test. So I'm always trying to deliver that information. But in regards to another point that you brought up, Sean, and you brought that up earlier, and I kind of want to add on to that, because we see that a lot too. You brought up the fact about some of these institutions, the MITs, the Georgetowns, these different institutions still requiring the SATs. But I'm also finding, Sean, at some particular universities, they may be test optional, for the vast majority of their students. But all of a sudden, to get into their pre-med program or get into their nursing program, for their couple programs, they're still requiring SATs and ACTs. Talking to the point of you benefiting having those scores under your belt. Are you seeing any of that with particular programs?
Little bit. I mean, I have not represented an institution that requires standardized. I mean, at Temple, we didn't require testing for any particular program, and at Tulane, we don't require standardized testing for any particular program. I definitely have heard that be the case at other institutions. So yeah, I mean, it is going to be an institution by institution decision. It's not like you can make, as a 10th grader or an 11th grader, yes, I'm going to submit standardized testing everywhere, or no, I'm not going to submit it. It's just not going to be that cut and dry.
Yeah. So Sean, big question we always get, all of us counselors always get this one. So if we are going to test option, right? If I am deciding to go to test optional here, what does that look like? Is there anything additional? And I know I can't speak for every institution, despite you having a wealth of knowledge here. And just in your experience, what does that look like if you're going to do test options? Is there anything additional that has to be done, or what does that look like for the application?
It's not that anything additional needs to be done, but you do have to accept the reality that if you are choosing to apply as a test optional candidate, the burden on your transcript is heavier. So, we do shift and we place much more weight on your high school transcript than we have before in a pre-test optional world. So, what that means is, maybe if you applied with standardized testing and I'm going to like use extreme examples just to kind of like make the point.
Sure.
Maybe if you're applying to Tulane and you have a 1550 on the SAT, or you have a 34 on the ACT, maybe I'm not going to be so picky about the fact that you drop your foreign language in your senior year, or maybe I'm not going to be so picky about the fact that you took stats instead of BC calculus, or maybe I'm not going to be so picky about the fact that you didn't have physics, but you had chemistry and biology under your belt. If you're applying to a place like Tulane and you have below what I would consider to be average scores for the students that are applying to a place like Tulane, which would be below a 1400, I'm going to be looking for you to have that fourth year of a foreign language. I'm going to be looking for you to have chemistry and physics and biology nailed on your transcript. I'm going to be looking for you to kind of really, at the very least, get up to pre-calculus, if not calculus, by your senior year. So you're going to have to really demonstrate academically that in the absence of standardized testing, you've done everything that you possibly can to be a really strong student, and you've really demonstrated mastery of academic areas that we would possibly be a little bit more forgiving with if we had really, really, really strong scores on either the SAT or the ACT. So it's not that there's more that you need to do in submitting, in choosing not to submit standardized testing, but it does shift the burden to your transcript a little bit more. Like, we are very much focused on looking at your transcript more than we ever have before. In fact, for a while, I would say a lot of college universities were a little bit more forgiving of ninth grade because we had standardized testing. And like, why do we really need to focus too much on ninth grade if somebody is submitting really, really strong testing that they just took 2 months ago? Now, if you're not submitting standardized testing, we're going back as far as like ninth grade to help make admission decisions. Now, it's not that you can't have a rocky freshman year and do really well 10th, 11th, and 12th grade and go to a great college, but like, the burden on the transcript is heavier now than it used to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Sean, one or two more questions, and then we're going to kind of move things over to Samantha here. I appreciate you helping us out tonight. So Sean, I guess my first question, kind of pulling back the reins here and just kind of getting back to the very basics. From your point of view, we have the Naviance program essentially that our high school and our community can utilize for a portion of figuring out what those averages are, right? So I have my scores now. How do I start figuring out the averages and whether or not I should send them? So are there anywhere else that you would say you could take a look at to find out some of those averages to be able to kind of get an idea of whether or not you should send your scores from that standpoint?
I don't have a good suggestion here, but I will give you one word of caution. A lot of students and families will sometimes rely on guidebooks and rely on like things like the US News and World Report rankings that have standardized testing ranges in them. They'll even look at websites. The reality is, if you're looking at a central resource like US News or the College Board website, or really any kind of centralized catalog of college universities, frequently the averages for SAT scores and ACT scores are at least a year, if not 2 years behind, because those sources pull from it really Department of Education validated sources. And the way that they do that consistently is that they use data that is accessible for every institution. And so typically what that means is the data is dated. So, if you were looking at the average SAT score for the incoming class at Tulane for fall 2022, it would look different than the classes that came in fall 2020. So you really need to navigate to each individual college university website, look at the average profile for the class that just entered, because that's the class that you're really closest in alignment with. And you can't rely on guidebooks or websites like US News for those averages, because they become really quickly out of date. Yeah,
it's funny you bring that up. I've had some recent conversations with a few families about that and bouncing around looking things, and I kind of gear them back towards a little bit. Again, all of this is very difficult to get to be exact, and I know parents, kind of pull their hair out when I'm saying, look, there's this a little bit of gray area here, but at least, outside of what we have available to us in Naviance, I always tell them to also point themselves back to, even the admissions website for the different universities are going to have usually some of the basic information on there. To your point, maybe not the very most updated info, but sometimes at least from the previous class that comes in, and that's pretty helpful. So,
Naviance is so hard.
Sorry, go ahead.
Looking at Naviance is hard because I don't know if you mask or you include any of this information, but just looking at GPA or testing, doesn't necessarily tell you if a recruited football player who is going to be our future Cotton Bowl champion was in the mix in any particular high school, or if a student was applying and both of their parents went to Tulane and we consider them to be a legacy candidate, or if they were a first-generation college student and we acted affirmatively for their first-generation college student status, or if they were a student who wanted to major in something really underrepresented at Tulane and we acted affirmatively for them in that space. So there are a lot of other variables that just some of these numbers in Naviance, it's going to be difficult for you to really kind of predict your chances for admission.
Yeah. Okay. Sean, one last question here. Just overall, the different places you've been, and especially since the pandemic, are you finding that more students are utilizing test optional, or are you finding more are actually submitting their test scores?
Oh, no. I mean, the percentage of students that that choose not to submit standardized testing has skyrocketed. I mean, just in 2 years, we're nearly at, I want to say like 65% of our applicants did not submit standardized testing this year.
Okay.
So the sweeping majority, and it's grown each year.
Yeah. All right, Sean, I guess just one last, not question, but just kind of topic that we talk about in the counseling center. It's a very gray question to answer for our families here. And I think we kind of have a question in our chat that's a little bit along these lines. That student that's right at the average, you find what your averages are. A student that's right at the average. I've had families and even talking with a lot of admissions people saying at, each year that average is essentially kind of going up a little bit because students are typically only finding that they're submitting that SAT or ACT score that's higher than the average each year, especially since the pandemic. It's not the first year that a lot of schools are test optional. I mean, I know it's hard for you to kind of give a clear answer on this one, but what are your thoughts about, if you're right near that average or whether or not they should send, or, it's clear if it's well below, it's clear if it's way above, that makes sense. But when you're near that average, what would your advice be before we kick things over here to Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very astute observation. And when I present to our faculty and our board of trustees, I say, before you get like too excited or too like glossy-eyed about how strong our incoming students are, because you're impressed by these like dazzling SAT and ACT scores, keep in mind that like the only students that now are likely submitting their scores are students that did their research and are only submitting above average scores from the year before. So our scores are creeping up and up and up. Doesn't necessarily mean that your average student who's coming into the university is getting stronger and stronger. So what was the question though?
No. So yeah, you basically answered it. I mean, it's hard for you to answer for every school, but you're seeing the same thing that we're starting to see here, where, if you really do your homework on the particular university that you're applying to, if your scores are right at that average and you notice that the scores are tending to go up, it might not be your best bet to send them in, knowing that your score might be below that average for the upcoming year when the competitive schools are only seeing scores go up a little bit. So yeah, you pretty much answered.
I would say, the only way I would say you might want to think about submitting an average score for that college university is if you want to kind of mitigate against any kind of deficiency in your academic record.
Good point.
If you see some C's or even worse percolating on your transcript, but then you've got average scores, that does demonstrate that, well, I mean, they're the kind of student that can do the work at a place like Tulane, but for whatever reason, they've had some academic deficiencies and that score might be able to kind of ameliorate or like take the attention off of some cruddy grades. But, if you're a student that's in that A to B range, an average score is not going to necessarily improve your chances for admission just because there's a score on file.
Yeah. Wow. Sean, awesome. Thanks for that advice, Sean. Listen, great job. I appreciate a ton of help. I know, we've talked in the past, we are having more and more students apply down there to Tulane. So I'm sure you'll be hearing from me, if not the other counselors bothering you about something somewhere
Okay.
along the lines. But yeah, we really appreciate your help and your wealth of knowledge every time we're able to get you in here to some of these webinars and bounce around to different topics. So thanks a lot, Sean.
All right. Have a good night.
All right, Sean, thanks again. So I'm going to move things over to Samantha Murray here. Samantha's from the University of South Carolina, and her topic tonight that we're going to discuss, switching gears here, is going to be writing the college essay. And, Samantha, much like I was just discussing with Sean about, parents pulling their hair out that there's not black and white answers to this. I know there's a lot of gray that's involved with the, writing an essay and submitting an essay and what that could look like from institution to institution. But we'll do our best here to try to clear up some things. Samantha, before we get things started, again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's the first time we've worked together, and as you've seen, from the numbers, we're having a ton of students apply to the University of South Carolina. So I appreciate you joining us tonight. And, as I mentioned to you before, little presentation, and we'll fire some questions at you, kind of like we did with Sean. So thanks again. And if you don't mind giving a little background about yourself before we jump into things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bob. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Samantha Murray. You guys can all call me Sam, though. I am the regional admissions representative for the University of South Carolina. It was really nice to find out that Sean is an alum. We love having Gamecocks in the room. That's awesome. I have been working at the University of South Carolina for a little over a year, but this is my 6th year in admissions. I started my admissions journey, so to speak, at Drexel University, funny enough as well. And then before transitioning to Cabrini University, so working for larger private, smaller private, and now working at a large state public institution. I reside outside of Philadelphia in Howardtown, Pennsylvania. I grew up in Philadelphia, Grace Ferry specifically. I'm from South Philly. So I'm familiar with this area. It's been a blast working for the University of South Carolina, and I'm excited to be here. I am a visual learner, so I'm going to go ahead and just really quick share my screen with everybody.
Sam.
Everybody see my PowerPoint.
Absolutely, Sam. This looks great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So as Bob said, I am going to be talking about the college essay, sort of going over what the college essay is, how to sort of tackle the beginnings of how to write the college essay, topic choices, maybe some do's and don'ts based on my personal opinions and what I've seen trend-wise. And then, of course, we'll open it up to questions.
Perfect.
The presentation is going to be a little funky looking just because I took sections from our South Carolina presentation, but then added some of my own personal tidbits. So my apologies for the visual. But just to go over just very quickly, basics, right? What is the college essay? In its simplest terms, the goal of an essay, a college essay, is for your admissions counselor to get to know you as the student beyond what is described elsewhere in your application. This is beyond your academic performance at your high school, beyond the counselor letter of recommendation, beyond the activities list. A lot of colleges are going to be using the essay to determine the strength of your writing skills, as well as just getting, a glimpse of who you are beyond your grades, your courses, and your test scores. My best advice with this going forward is to try not to, repeat what's been mentioned elsewhere in your application. There are sections of the Common App, which I will talk about, that can sort of aid to adding some supplemental information that could explain maybe a faulty grade or a faulty year in terms of academics that, would be beneficial to have a counselor share. But I always say that for a student, you really should be focusing that college essay on getting an idea of what you as a student want us to know as admissions counselors that we can't already pull out of the application. They are a part of the application process with every school, but what you're going to also want to do is check to see what schools use them for. Not every school is going to use the college application the same way. A lot of you are going to hear throughout the next couple of years on your college admissions journey the word holistic review. Sean mentioned it earlier. It's going to be a part of that vocabulary. A holistic review process is what it sounds like. It means that an admissions process is going to incorporate a lot of different variables, your transcript, test scores if you choose to submit them, a college essay, your activities list, maybe a letter of recommendation. But while a school might say that they are a holistic review school, it does not mean that every aspect of the application is going to be viewed equally. They might say we review everything holistically, but the transcript is what we're going to be primarily focusing on. And only if we have to dive further into the application are we then going to review the essay. Or for other institutions, holistic might truly mean, no, we are going to review every single thing on equal parts. Or a school might come back and say, we're not going to read your essay. You are going to submit it because it's a part of the common application, but just know for X, Y, and Z institution, we're not going to look at it. That is the unfortunate part of this process, is that you as students are going to be putting in a lot of effort for sometimes having and applying to institutions that might not pay attention to it. But the key to what I hope to you all to take away from all of this is that regardless of what schools you're applying to, you still want to make sure that you are putting in a solid effort in regards to this essay, because you never know what institution is going to be reading it, and you don't know how much this institution is going to be weighing your college essay as a part of the process.
Yeah, Sam, it's interesting you bring that up, you know, and I talk to a lot of families about that, and it's you know, to your point, kind of to Sean's point earlier here, it's like you want to put your best foot forward. So you're going to put your best foot forward by delivering the best essay possible for yourself. I have parents ask me all the time, well, Mr. Findora, you keep saying holistic. What does that look like for each of these institutions? You know, it's so difficult to really put into a black and white answer. I kind of give them a little bit of a gray answer that, you know, I find when you're a very, very large institution, we have a lot of kids applying to Penn State and Pitt, being here up here in Pennsylvania, these large institutions that are not taking letters of recommendation for their main campus applications, well, they're probably putting in a little bit more emphasis on your essays when you look at different pieces of the puzzle from that standpoint, as opposed to maybe some of the smaller schools, you know, that have different components that they're going to be able to really dive in and other pieces of the puzzle rather than a college essay. But I'm happy you brought that up, that regardless of where you're applying, to put your best foot forward, you're going to want to have this in your back pocket regardless, you know, and that's a really good point. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, like the University of South Carolina is a perfect example of a school that for general admission to the university, we don't look at letters of recommendation. We just have too many applicants to be able to fish through the number of letters of rec that students want to send. So when I'm reviewing applications, that essay is really the only other thing that I have to review a student outside of their transcripts and potentially test scores. You know, yes, the activities list is there, but there's not, you know, there's character limitations to how much detail you can put into them, and you can only list 10. So that essay is really the opportunity for me to kind of get a glimpse into what this student is like. And that's why for me, it's really important for a student to sort of set up, you want to view this as a formal piece of writing. However, you don't want to write this like your traditional 5-paragraph essay that you've been taught in high school, right? And certainly you never want to submit a piece of writing that you did for an English or history class as your college essay. If there's a piece of advice that I can give to any student, please don't send us an essay about The Great Gatsby. I also read that book in 10th grade. But you also want to make sure that it is formal in the sense that you are going through, you're having it proofread, you're getting it grammatically checked by multiple people, and you are writing it constantly. This is not an essay that you should be writing 2 nights before the application is due and just sending it in. This should be something that you should all be thinking about the summer going into your senior year of college. You should have a rough draft ready to show your college counselors prior to you walking into the door your first day of your senior year.
Yeah, Sam, you that timeline is perfect. And we're very, very fortunate. We've had college admissions rep come in and work with our English teachers. And our English teachers during students' junior year, and that's why I don't want to confuse the community here. You know, I want to be very clear about this. As Sam mentioned, when you're submitting some writing prompt or essay or something for, and I have to be careful here, Sam, my wife teaches in the English department in 11th grade. When you're submitting something for one of her writing components for The Great Gatsby in 11th grade, that's a completely different essay than what they work on at the end of the year, they prepare themselves. Most of our English classes spend almost up to a week, and they're diving in specifically on the student's college essay and working on that, proofreading, getting multiple eyeballs, peer editing. The teachers are working on it, and we've had our English teachers actually come in and get feedback and work with over the years, college admissions rep, to get some ideas, kind of some of the topics you're bringing up now. What do you look for? What are some of the ideas? What are some of the basics? So yeah, to your point, we're very fortunate at Unionville High School that by the time our students leave their junior year, they have a basics of a college essay under their belt while they're diving in to the summer before their senior year. So thanks for bringing it up. Thanks for bringing up the timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the key with this for students is to just not be afraid to let your personality shine through, right? It's very hard to differentiate a large number of students. If I had 25 students from Unionville High School this year apply, and I don't have my exact numbers on me for this fall, but just if I had 25 students, it's very difficult for me to pick out a student A versus student B until I actually go in and read their essays. And that's what allows me to sort of get an idea of not just who the student is on an academic standpoint, but also personally. And for an admissions counselor, it allows us to see how the student would be able to bring their personality, their presence on their high school campus to the undergraduate level, and what those students can provide to our campus communities. So when you're thinking about writing your essay, you should be thinking about, why should an admissions representative admit you? I try not to give a grocery list. Leave the list of accomplishments that you have for the other parts of your essay, right? It is, and also don't ramble. It took me a very long time when I was going through my college process back in 2013 to not write a 3-page essay for my common application. The common application minimum is normally about 650 words. So you want to keep it short and sweet, and, make sure that you're giving examples. Don't just stick to a sentence saying, I have an outgoing personality. Describe a situation in which you were outgoing. What did you take away from the experience that changed your projection in your high school career, right? It's not necessarily about, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but it's not necessarily about listing your greatest accomplishment or telling a time that was very difficult for you, but it's about the other half of that. What did you learn from that? And what do you hope to then take from those experiences and apply to your college level?
Great. Yeah, great. That's great.
These are the common application essay questions. Every single one of these questions, and I tell my students this and my parents this, all this basically does is just ask you different ways to tell us something different about yourself. That's all these questions are asking you. They're not trying to trick you. They're not trying to, cause any concern. Don't feel like there's one better essay topic versus another. I would say for the 7th one, an essay topic of your choice. If you can avoid that one, I would, just because you then run the issue of not necessarily answering the question. And again, pointing back to that proofreading and making sure you're having multiple eyes on your essay. It's important to make sure that the people who are reading your essays know what topic and what question you plan on answering in the Common App, because they're going to be able to tell you what you are answering and if you are answering the question, because I can't tell you how many times I've read essays that are fantastic, except for the fact that they have nothing to do with the prompt that the student selected, and whether the student just didn't know what prompt to select and just picked a random one, or thought they were going in one direction and just went into a completely different one. And those are the little things that can make or break an admission, especially into some higher level programs where the holistic review is a much more prominent.
Yeah.
Now, I did also mention that there is an opportunity for students to add additional information right now on the Common App, and I'm assuming that it's going to remain there moving forward. There will be a COVID outbreak community disruption section of the Common Application. So I know some of you might be thinking, I had a rough year with COVID. These are the effects of what the COVID outbreak has done for me, my family. And you don't want to necessarily take that essay topic and focus on it. You can use the community disruption section to talk about that. In the same way that there's also now a community disruption section on the school report that your counselors send us. So when I get a school report from Unionville and
Yep.
I'm reading it and I'm reading what Bob is writing about a student and he
Yep.
put something about the community disruption, I know that this isn't just some general disruption.
Yeah.
I know that this is something that's very specific to that student.
Yeah, Sam, that's also a really good point. We get that question a lot in the counseling center of what should I, I my 9th grade year, or, my 8th grade year, my 10th grade year, it affected my math because I had a tough time learning virtually. Well, it's despite how difficult that circumstance can be for a student, I share with families and parents and students, again, going back to the fact that everybody's circumstance may be a little bit different, but if you know multiple people that had a very similar circumstance as you, that's not necessarily what my conversations with a lot of you in college admissions have been. What's this circumstance should be really separating you from everyone else, that your particular circumstance, your community disruption, anything dealing with COVID should really be a different circumstance, more so than what you're typically going to hear when 4 or 5 individuals that you eat lunch with are all dealing with this very similar thing. It's always hard to kind of give advice on that, but that's kind of the delivery that a lot of us in the counseling department deliver to them, is what's really, really separating you with this question as opposed to a lot of other students answering it.
Right. I always tell students the excuse of, well, this was my whole freshman year was virtual, no longer applies, since everybody's freshman year was virtual, right?
Yeah.
However, if there is an extenuating circumstance that affected your freshman year that might have been the cause of COVID, but not necessarily, just your academic performance, then yes, that could be something that you discuss. But outside of that, the community disruption could be a decent way of even just, I've had students who list an additional materials section where they talk about maybe not a COVID disruption, but during their sophomore year, there was a massive death in their family, or they went through something, they had like a really big medical scare. And that was maybe why there was a drop in their academic performance. And while they didn't want to take their essay topic and talk about that, they wanted to make sure that that was noticeable. And that's something that I encourage students to do if they feel like they want us to know about it, but they don't want to make their entire college essay about that topic, because that's a very difficult topic to write about. And that's also very personal. And we as admissions counselors are not privy to that information.
Yeah.
And it's not something that, for me, I have the right to know. That's a student's business, whether that student gets to choose whether they share that with all the admissions reps. But you do want to, think about the fact that for however many applications that you're sending out, that's how many admissions readers at minimum are going to be reading all that information. So do keep all of that in mind as well as you kind of think about your topics and what you might be thinking about writing. I love this section personally when asking and answering the questions, because this is where I always tell students my 80-20 rule.
Okay.
When you're thinking about a topic and you're thinking about what you want to write about, 20% of your essay should be the blanket topic. 80% of that essay should be the experiences that you gained from that topic, how it affected you, and how you hope to take those experiences and apply them to your college career.
That's great.
I use the example of my grandfather is my hero, right?
Yep.
Classic question, or a
Yep.
grandparent, a cousin, whoever, my mom, my dad.
Yep.
An adult in your life is your hero.
Yep.
You don't want to write an essay about why your grandfather is the greatest person on earth. And that's nothing against your grandparent. Sure, your grandfather is wonderful,
Yep.
but your grandfather is not the one who is applying to college.
Great
You
point. Yep.
are. So for me, and as a benefit, when you're thinking about what you want to write about, if you're going to talk about the COVID outbreak, if you're going to talk about how maybe you tore your ACL before like a big game in your sport, right? Or how you got cut from the lacrosse team, or you didn't make the show that you auditioned for. It's not a story of this is all the buildup to tell you that I didn't make it. It's I didn't make the musical that I auditioned for. Here's what I did to work my way through adversity and the lessons that I learned that I can then apply when I go to college. That's what we want to say. So when I mean 80-20, I mean 80% of the essay is about what you learned from your experiences. 20% is setting up the audience, us as admissions counselors, on what that experience was and what you learned from it. Because I know it can be so hard for students to not just dive into the weeds and want to feel like they need to explain it all in order to like get a really good idea. Trust me, I'd much rather read about you and what you learned and the lessons that you got from a specific experience or life-changing event than how you came to that conclusion based on like who you might have like interacted with. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, highlight, content is very specific. You want to be, remember, imagine that the audience has no idea what you're talking about. I joke with my students all the time. I'm the least athletic person you're ever going to meet. I did theater when I was in college. So if a student is talking to me about, not making like the varsity lacrosse team or having a serious injury before soccer, I cannot relate to that because that's not a shared experience.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to go in there and immediately disregard that essay. No, if anything, I'm going to want to read more into that. So, keep in mind that we're not going to necessarily know everything that you're talking about. Same way that if you are applying to an institution that's in California, they might not know exactly all the ins and outs of what's going on in Unionville and in Delaware County, Montgomery County, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and like certain traditions that we have. So keep that in mind as well, that, very specific topics can be great in retrospect, but you also have to think about like the audience and how not everybody is going to understand your topics, right? And that this is for you. At the end of the day, this is your essay. I tell students, I'm going to stop sharing my screen just because this is sort of like the end. But this is an opportunity for students to share a lot about themselves. Yep. I personally don't think there is a bad essay topic. I know that can be a little taboo, and I know there are college reps of mine that will tell you they have specific essays that, they rolled their eyes when they read it. But for me, and it's important for students to know, is that it doesn't matter if I read 50 applications in a row where the essay is all about the student who got a major injury and could no longer play in their senior year season of whatever sport they play, right? Mm-hmm. The important thing is that each student felt that experience shaped their life, and they gained lessons from that they hope to take with them in college. Mm-hmm. And I implore students to not stress about what college reps are going to think about your specific topic, because it is not my job to judge a student based on the topic that they've chose, as long as the topic is written well and gives me a good idea of who the student is outside of the classroom. Yeah. You can write as a diehard Eagles fan, you can write an essay about how much you love the Dallas Cowboys. And like, as long as it's a really solid college essay, internally my heart might hurt, but like, we're going to go with it, because it's not about, that's a bias that we as counselors are constantly checking on ourselves. And I never want a student to stress about feeling as though they have to present a topic that is quote unquote worthy of an admissions counselor, right? Because it's not about us, it's about you.
Yeah. So Sam, we have a couple questions for you here, if you have a little bit more time here to help us out. I've had a lot of parents ask me about this, and Sam, this can be very college, university specific, but just in case you have any experiences with it, anything about, a supplemental essay, or what does that kind of look like? Or if you have any feedback of what that term is and what that looks like?
Yeah, so a supplemental essay could be used for a number of reasons. It could be used for additional programming. So for the University of South Carolina, we have an honors college, and our honors college requires 2 additional essays on top of the common application essay. A supplemental essay could be used it could be a requirement that comes after the fact, after you've already applied. Let's say you're going through, like a reader is going through your essay. They see an outlier maybe in your transcript that isn't mentioned anywhere else in your application. That counselor might reach out to the student specifically or the college counselor and just say, hey, Sam's application seems to have this outlier. What does this mean? Can the student provide any more additional context for it? In some cases, a student might need a supplemental essay if they have, a disciplinary action that's listed on their application. If a student has ever been cited for a disciplinary issue within their high school, they will need to cite that on the Common App. And in some cases, college or university, in order to accept that student, might need that student to write a supplemental essay. if a student is on the cusp of admissions and that student and that school tracks demonstrated interest, that school might require a supplemental essay just so the student can prove that, yes, I want to go to South Carolina or Tulane or Westchester, right? I always tell students a supplemental essay is pretty well noticed on an admissions website. If you know that you're going to be applying into like particular programs or a specific school that's going to require it, they're going to tell you that on their website, or they're going to tell you, if you meet any of these X qualifiers, you will need to submit a supplemental essay. And so that's another way that you can sort of like think about it as well.
Okay, that's good. Sam, do you have any experiences with, I know a few schools, and again, this could be very school specific, but any schools essentially having additional like long answer questions or anything along those lines comparable to the essay? You know, do you have any experience with that at all, or have you seen that in the past?
Yeah, and again, I think it is very school specific, but I think for more competitive schools, you're going to see as institutions continue to grow in popularity, you're going to see more ways that schools can differentiate students and have students stand out. So I have seen schools where they will ask, again, for example, with our honors college, you know, one of the questions that we ask is a short answer, why do you want to join the South Carolina Honors College?
Yeah.
And as terrible as this is going to sound, we weed out a number of students who accidentally list, well, the reason that I want to go to the Clemson Honors College, and we're like, yep, okay. And that's not to say that the student isn't a great student, but to us, that shows the student didn't take the time to answer these questions.
Yeah.
To me, I think that any supplemental additional like short answer questions, supplemental essays are just more ways for the institution to get a grip on who they think the student is and if they think that that student could be a good choice, and also see how much time and effort that student is willing to put into this essay or to this application. Because in some institutions, the more effort a student puts into the application, the more interest that student is showing in that institution, which if that school tracks that demonstrated interest could help increase that student's chance.
Yeah, Sam, that's great. We, you know, when we talk about the essays with our students, like I mentioned, we're very fortunate at our school to have our English teachers put the time in towards the end of their junior year. And, you know, it's always a very complicated situation because there's not exactly one model of how you should do this to a certain degree. You covered a lot of the foundational information, and Sam, you know, I've been doing this a while, much like yourself. You know, it's always interesting to hear the different representatives that we've worked with over the years. And every single one of them said the exact same thing as you. Make sure that you have the correct institution on there. If you're writing something very specific, which you would think would be one of the top things you would look for, but I hear it time and time again. So I'm not shocked by that. But it's just another way for us to reiterate that to our community out here. You know, Sam, you know, kind of recapping things here a little bit before we move into financial aid here with Katrina. You know, I think you brought up some really good topics there about the, you know, having multiple eyeballs on that essay, getting feedback on that essay. We're fortunate that we have part of our process for our juniors to do that. You know, that supplemental essay, to your point, can look very, very different from institution to institution. And, you know, a little bit, that has to be a little bit more detailed. It's more difficult to kind of get more feedback on that because, like you said, it has to be a little bit more from the heart, right? I mean, it's a very, very particular question you're asking. You know, I've seen supplemental essays in the past. Why this university, right? Why this university? It's that simple, you know, or just off the wall kind of creative essays for supplemental essays of, you're on an island and here's what you're left with. What do you do next? You know, just trying to catch a different kind of perspective from a student. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it all also, but, you know, from that standpoint, it's tough. And I really appreciate you bringing up that 80-20. I think as far as examples of essays, you know, we talk a little bit about that and what that could look like. It's hard to do that because it's so specific to each student, but having that 80-20 rule that you brought up is a nice example of that. You know, we have that a lot of conversations, and even conversations I have with admissions rep about potentially interviewing our students. And I go through and I do mock interviews with our students before they would sit down with any individuals from a college admissions standpoint. And top feedback that I tend to get from the college admissions people and the students is when they're asking that question about, you know, anybody can say to a certain degree they're hardworking, give examples afterwards. Anybody can say this particular person was a hero of mine, but give examples of how that's in your life, not describing that particular person and spending your time on that. How's it going to affect you on the next step? So Sam, I really, really appreciate your time. Awesome job. I'm sure, like I said, we were having more and more students apply to the University of South Carolina. So I'm sure if it's not me, it'll be one of our counselors, calling or knocking on your door and figuring out how we can get some help here and making sure we can clear anything up and help our students out. So I really appreciate your time tonight. And thanks again. Before I move over to Katrina, Sam, thank you. And like I said, I'll be in touch in the future. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody in the webinar has a great rest of their evening.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. Thanks again. So our next topic is always a somewhat controversial one here when it comes to changes from year in and year out. And I have parents pulling their hair out each year, I feel like, when it comes to this process. But our next topic is financial aid. Katrina, thank you very much, for spending your time here tonight, helping us. There's definitely a very unique situation that you're in here trying to present to our community. I always start these things when we start talking about financial aid. We always give a nice presentation in the beginning of the year to our families a little bit before that October 1st deadline, which we'll talk about here in a little bit probably. And, we always give a little presentation. And then when we start talking about the financial aid portion of things here, it's always that overview that I say. We're trying to give the basics here. We're trying to give a nice overview. Each family and their personal financial information is very delicate to them. But Katrina, when I talk about this process and financial aid, if you can kind of cover some of the basics for us here tonight, I would really appreciate that. Same thing, Katrina, we'll have some questions coming into the chat. I'll keep them to the end of the presentation. And then if you don't mind, just kind of giving a little bit about your background before we jump into things here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob. So I've been working with Bob for a couple of years now. I am the Assistant Director of Financial Aid at Westchester University. I've been here for about 4 years. I've been in financial aid for almost a decade. Prior to working at Westchester, I worked at Widener University in the financial aid office, and I worked at Delaware County Community College. So I have a background in financial aid for the community college, the private university, and the state university. I'm also the PASHE sector rep for the Pennsylvania Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. So I work closely with all of the state universities in Pennsylvania and their financial aid offices. I do have a presentation because, like Samantha, I am also a visual learner.
No, perfect. Very helpful.
And I'm going to share my screen now.
That's great.
So can you
Can
see my screen? Okay. Perfect. So I am going to preface this. We're going to do a high-level overview of financial aid. We're going to talk about the FAFSA. We're going to talk about what happens after you do the FAFSA. And then we're going to talk about, at the end, what everyone wants to know, scholarships. I will preface when I go into the FAFSA is that I'm talking specifically about the FAFSA for the 22-23 academic year. So this is going to relate to the current seniors at Unionville. If you are a junior, sophomore, or freshman, come back next year for the presentation on financial aid, because FAFSA will be changing for the 24-25 academic year. Okay, so let's get right into it. So in order to do the FAFSA, the parent and the student will need what's called an FSA ID. So the FSA ID is a username and password that allows the student and the parent to electronically sign the FAFSA. I highly recommend not using your high school email when you're creating the FSA ID, because this FSA ID is going to be with you for the rest of your career in college and after, if you're going to be taking out loans and things like that. So you want to make sure that you're using an email that you're going to have access to for a long time if you ever need to password reset. Parents and students, you should also have separate email addresses. So I know parents, we want to set up everything and do everything for our kids, but we want to make sure that we are separating 2 separate emails and 2 separate logins, and keep that information somewhere where you're going to have quick access to it. So I keep it in my notes tab, so I know I have my FSA ID. So once you do have the FSA ID, then you can go ahead and do the 22-23 FAFSA. That is at studentaid.gov/FAFSA. Students do not need to be officially accepted to a university to do the FAFSA. And I want to make sure that you're clear on that. So you don't need to wait for the acceptance letter to come out. You can do the FAFSA as soon as it opens. There are a multitude of different organizations that will help you do the FAFSA. If you're interested in a particular school, a lot of the financial aid offices have FAFSA nights. I'm sure that there's something at Unionville that you guys do to help facilitate doing the FAFSA each year. So highly recommend using those. In the FAFSA, there's a couple different sections currently. So the student demographics, school selection, dependency status, and the financial information. I'm going to go over a couple of these in depth, and I'm going to skim over some others. So first thing I'm going to do is who is considered the parent for the FAFSA. So right now, when you're doing the FAFSA, whoever the student lives with primarily is going to be the parent on the FAFSA. So if both parents are together in the same household, both parents will be on the FAFSA. If it's a divorce situation, it's whoever the student lives with primarily. One of the questions I get all the time is, well, what if we have shared custody? And my response to that is there are 365 days in a year. So one parent has the student for
Yep.
one more day.
Yep.
So that's how I recommend doing that.
Yep, good question.
If the student has like a specific situation where parents are not involved in the student's life, or it the student is in foster care or something like that, then the parent would not need to be on there. Grandparents are not the parent on the FAFSA. So only custodial parents, biological parents, and adoptive parents. Okay, so dependency status. That's one of the biggest things that I see, common mistakes on the FAFSA, is students trying to become an independent because they think they're going to get more financial aid. Or if the parent is not willing or able to provide financially for the student, that does not make the student an independent student. So even if the parents are unable or unwilling to provide financially for the student would still need to put parent information on there. So in the case of parents are divorced but have remarried, yes, step parent is listed on the FAFSA. So that step parent who is with the primary provider, that they would also be on the FAFSA, even if that person is not contributing financially to the child's the student's financial aid.
Yep.
Okay, so in order to be an independent student, these are the requirements to be an independent student. So 24 years of older, a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, and I want to touch on this. So if your student is considering ROTC, being in ROTC does not make you an independent student. You have to have served active military duty. I get that question a lot, is where I'm joining junior ROTC or I'm participating in that. That does not make you an independent student, only if you've served active military duty. And then, or students who are in a situation where there's a legal guardianship or something like that, that would be considered an independent student. Now, I know that this is not the be all end all. So if you have a student who is in a particular situation where, there's some things that are going on, and the parents aren't involved or something like that, then I would recommend reaching out to the individual financial aid offices that you're applying to. Okay, so for the 23-24 FAFSA, it opened October 1st. You can begin doing the FAFSA now. I would recommend doing the FAFSA as early as possible. And I want to say this, even if you don't think you're going to get anything if you don't think you're going to get any federal grants or state grants or anything like that, you should still do the FAFSA. And the reason being, when I get into scholarships, is that a lot of institutions, when it comes to institutional aid, require the FAFSA being done. For example, at Westchester, we have what's called a general scholarship application. And one of the requirements is to do that, you just have to do the FAFSA. We don't look at it in terms of eligibility for a particular scholarship, but a requirement is the FAFSA has to be done. So my preface is, do the FAFSA each year, even if you think you're not going to get anything, because 9 times out of 10, if you call a financial aid office and we see that you don't have a FAFSA, that's the first thing that we're going to tell you to do, is do the FAFSA. So the FAFSA does use the year prior financial data. So for the 23-24 FAFSA, it is using the 2021 financial income. Okay, so the 2021 tax information. And I know that, that's 2 years prior, circumstances change. If you have an income situation where it looks very different than it was in 2021, contact the financial aid offices, because then we can have a more in-depth conversation of what the options are. Okay, so here's kind of what in the future that we're looking at. So the current 12th graders will be filing the 23-24 FAFSA using 2021's taxes. And then again, 11th, 10th, 9th graders come back for the next year's tutorial on financial aid for the new updates to the FAFSA. PA state grants. So there are specific deadlines for the FAFSA. As a Pennsylvania resident, you're going to want to do the FAFSA before May 1st of each year to even be considered for a PA state grant. Okay, that is a hard deadline. If you do the FAFSA at 12:01 a.m. on May 2nd, FIA will not consider you for a PA state grant, point blank period. I would highly recommend doing that before May 1st. Certain institutions may have priority deadlines. They may have hard deadlines. For example, when I worked at Widener, there was a priority deadline. So the students who did the FAFSA before January 1st were packaged first. So maybe certain institutions, like private institutions, may have institutional funding that's relied on by the FAFSA deadline. So I recommend doing the FAFSA as early as you can, and doing it each year, because each year the FAFSA and your financial aid can change. Okay, so the types of aid. Now that you've done the FAFSA, what does that mean? What can I get? Okay. First, I'm going to talk about merit scholarships. So merit scholarships are based off of academic merit from high school. So they're based off of high school transcripts, GPA, SAT, ACT scores we talked about earlier in this tonight. The merit scores are usually done by, merit scholarships are usually done by admissions offices. So typically when a student applies to a university and is accepted, they're automatically considered for what's called the merit scholarships. And that the criteria for merit scholarships can vary from institution to institution. Private universities, their merit scholarships are typically larger than institutions like a public school like Westchester, because the costs are different. So you may see the criteria for a merit scholarship at a private institution is much different than the criteria for a merit scholarship at a public institution. So just in my experience when I worked at Widener, typically I would say about 70% of the population received a merit scholarship, right? At Westchester, because we're a public institution, the top 5% of our applicants, so the top 5% academic merit receive a merit scholarship. So it's very, very different.
And Katrina, one point that I want to bring up that I'm getting more and more questions about. And again, this is one of those that each institution or college can be a little bit different from this standpoint. But I have families coming to me and saying, look, Mr. Findora, I as you mentioned earlier, Katrina, you kind of touched on it. I'm well aware that my family is not going to be able to is not going to qualify anything. We're very fortunate and financially from that standpoint. And they're frustrated because they're saying, however, some of these schools are now telling me in order for my child to get the merit-based scholarships, I need to fill out the FAFSA. And there are some of the schools. Have you heard of that at all? I'm hearing that more and more. It feels like each year that schools are tying the two together.
Yeah, so merit scholarships are typically independent of the FAFSA, so they're not based on financial need, right? Those are done by admissions. Now, the scholarships that I mentioned earlier, particularly at Westchester and the other public schools, just the criteria is required to do the
Yeah.
FAFSA. We're not even going to look at what your
Yeah.
financial
Yep.
need is. Okay.
Yeah.
But you just have to have the FAFSA done. In our general scholarship application, you put in your student demographics, and then before it will let you enter your essay for the scholarship application, it says, have you completed the FAFSA? If you have not checked that off and you said no, it will not let you move on.
Okay.
We don't look at that, but that is something that is just a requirement for a lot of applications,
Okay.
especially when it comes to institutional aid. So
Yep.
there's the merit scholarships that come from the admissions office that are based off of the academic merit. Then there's the institutional funds that come from the university and the financial aid office that are based off of the financial need. So that is based off of the FAFSA. And then there are some that even if you're not qualified for a federal Pell Grant, or which I'll talk about in a minute, or a PA state grant that are based off of the EFC from FAFSA, that's still a requirement. So you could still receive institutional funding, even if you don't qualify for a federal Pell Grant. And then the financial need-based aid, that is based off of the FAFSA. So like I said, certain institutional scholarships or grants, federal loans, state grants, federal work study. So students who want to work on campus and receive funding from the federal work study funds, yes, you would need to do the FAFSA for that. And then of course there's loans like the federal plus loan and the federal private loan. So let's dig a little bit deeper just into some of the different need-based scholarships. So for federal aid, the current Pell Grant 22-23, the minimum is 672, the maximum is 6,895 for the year. If a student is eligible for a federal Pell Grant, they could potentially be eligible for a federal supplemental educational opportunity grant, an SEOG grant. And that can vary from institution to institution. There's the Teach Grant, Work Study, the PA State Grant, institutional merit aid. Now, like I said, so the institutional merit aid, there are some institutions that require additional application called the CSS profile, which I'll get into in a second. Then there's the federal loans, okay? So any student who does a FAFSA is automatically eligible for federal loans. And it could be a combination of subsidized and unsubsidized student loans. The loan amounts are contingent upon grade level. So freshmen, first year college students can be eligible for $3,500 in federal loans. And as they move up, they can get increases in their federal loans. Now, the interest rate is set by the Department of Education. It's not based off of credit score or anything like that. The current interest rate is 3.73%. Interest rates do change every July 1st. I will say that the subsidized student loan, the government does pay the interest while the student is in school. So that is essentially an interest-free loan. It doesn't begin accruing interest until 6 months after graduation. Now, the unsubsidized student loan does begin accruing interest from when the student is in school, and the interest rate is 3.73%. And I will make the caveat that right now, we all know that there's a little bit of inflation happening. Interest rates are increasing. So when we saw an all-time historic low in 2020 and 2021, interest rates are starting to increase, and that's both federal and private loan interest rates. So you're going to want to pay careful attention to that. So like I mentioned earlier, the CSS profile, there are some schools, and here's some of the ones that are listed in Pennsylvania, that if you're thinking of applying to these schools and you want to receive any institutional aid, right? So even if you're not going to qualify for any federal grants or any federal aid, will require the CSS profile. Right now, the cost is $25 for the first school and $16 for any other school thereafter. It does open October 1st. They will require additional documentation. So W-2, tax returns, untaxed income, bank statements, pretty much all of that information will be required for these schools. So if you're thinking of applying to any of these schools, you're going to want to do the CSS profile and do the FAFSA. You typically do them at the same time because they will ask a lot of the same questions. Okay, so once you have an award letter, you're going to want to compare them. There are a multitude of different tools to compare award letters because, like I said, they're institution to institution. All of the different state schools have different award letters, state schools versus private schools and community colleges. All the aid can look different and it can be really overwhelming. So there are a few tools that you can use. FIA, this one I'm showing here, FIA does have one. That's the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, where you can basically put in the cost, all the aid that you're getting, and then it will tell you what your actual cost is, your bottom line, because that's what you want to figure out. What is your bottom line for the year? And is this something that is financially affordable? So we did talk about doing the FAFSA, what types of aid there are. How do I pay for all of this, right? So there are loans. There's the Federal Parent Plus loan, which would be in the parent's name for the student. It's important to note that the Parent Plus loan can never be transferred to the student. It would be forever the parent's responsibility to pay back. Now, if you as the parent have like an agreement worked out with your student, like, hey, and you know, when you graduate, you got to pay this back. That's between you and the student. As far as the Department of Education is concerned, it's the parent's responsibility. Now, private loans are typically in the student's name with a cosigner. Simply for their age of credit, they will need to be a cosigner. Cosigners do not necessarily have to be parents. It's anybody who is creditworthy who is willing to cosign the loan. Now, interest rates for private loans are based off of credit score of both the applicant, so the student, and the cosigner. And interest rates can vary on that. Then there's university payment plans. You're usually per semester. They may or may not have a fee attached to that. 529 plan. So if you have a 529 plan, you can send those funds to the school. That happens pretty seamlessly. Each school is different on who handles the 529 fund. So at my previous institution, when I was a private, financial aid handled all of that. Here at Westchester, the bursar's office handles all of that. So it could be different on which office is handling that. So you'll want to contact each school that the school that you're committed to see how that process works.
Yeah, Katrina, real quick, if you don't mind, if we can go back there for a sec, not to interrupt you, but I get a lot of questions about that also. Can you just spend just a minute or two just kind of describing what a 529 plan is? I do these presentations with our middle school families for course selection and meet with the PTO from the middle school, and I'm out in the community a lot, and I have a lot of families and parents that are saying, hey, listen, I have no idea what the college application process looks like, but somebody gave me a nice piece of advice here while my child was still in the beginning of middle school or even elementary school and things like that. And they said, start a 529 plan. Is there any way you could just describe briefly just what a 529 plan is for our families out there?
Yeah, essentially it is a college savings plan, right? So there are, certain tax amenities to having that and things like that for the student. They usually can be high yield, they can be low yield. So whatever you're putting into it, you're going to have that fund for when the student is going to go to college. When it comes to tax purposes, I will say if you just Google 529 plan and the current taxes, because in Pennsylvania, actually last month, what the Pennsylvania legislature just passed is that if you have a 529 plan and your student doesn't use all of it or hasn't used all of it, after 12 years, you can then put that 529 plan into your 401k, 403b, or retirement plan. So you could think of it this way, that if you have a 529 plan and you're saving for your student, whatever, and they get plenty of scholarships, grants, all of that good stuff, whatever they don't use, you can then transfer to your 401k, 403b retirement plan. So that could be a supplemental retirement.
Katrina, I'm really happy you brought that up. Thanks for kind of clearing that up and allow me to kind of interrupt you here, because I get tons of questions about that. Thank you for clarifying. Oh,
of course. Yeah. So like I mentioned, the different types of loans, private loans and Parent Plus loans. Now on to the thing that everyone asks me so much about. So scholarship tips. Okay. So this is just a little thing for me. I didn't pay a dime when I went to college because I had so many outside scholarships. The school paid me to go to school. So because I was obsessed with applying for scholarships, and I'm going to give you some of my biggest tips when it comes to scholarships. So you need to apply for scholarships starting junior year. Okay, you need to start looking at scholarships, start applying for those junior year, getting those essays ready. So we talked about the college essay, right? So what about the essays for scholarships? Okay, this is the opportunity for those scholarship essays. For a lot of them, you want to brag about yourself. This is the time when you say, I've accomplished this, I have done this. Those are the types of things that a lot of committees are looking at. So I am on the scholarship committee at Westchester University. So when we're reviewing essays, those are the types of essays that we're looking at. And what we want to see is, why does a student deserve this scholarship, right? So what makes you uniquely you that you deserve this scholarship? Okay, so those are the types of things that we're looking at. There are different types of scholarships based off of your major, your GPA, things like that. You want to apply for scholarships before the academic year starts. So academic years for college typically start in August. So you want to have scholarships in the bag and ready before August, right? Because I say, when you look at a deadline for a scholarship, if the deadline for the scholarship is August, you're not going to find out about that scholarship and whether or not you got it until maybe October. Okay, so you want to keep those deadlines in mind. But you also want to have a strong personal statement. You want to have a resume. A lot of times scholarships are looking for resumes. So did you have a part-time job? Did you volunteer within your community? A lot of community organizations do have scholarships. I always say start local first. So start with your high school, your community organizations first, and then branch out. There are a couple different scholarship resources. Here are some of my personal favorites. So FastWeb, Chegg, College Board, scholarships.com, CollegeNet, Scholarship Monkey, Unigo. A lot of these scholarship sites are search engines. So you can put in literally, this is my intended major, this is my current GPA, these are some of my extracurriculars, and it will spit out scholarships that are appropriate for you. Some other scholarship tips, I will say, do not discount the small ones. Okay, so a lot of times students will see a $10,000 scholarship and go, I'm going to apply for that. Yes. But then other students are also saying $10,000 scholarship, I'm going to apply for that. The larger the scholarship, the more competitive it's going to be. The more likely that it is only going to go to maybe one, maybe two students, and it's probably most likely not going to be renewable, meaning it's only going to be for 1 year. Whereas if you see like a $250 scholarship, a $500 scholarship, a $1,000 scholarship, those smaller scholarships are less competitive. They're usually renewable, meaning that you will get them year after year, and they can stack. So one of the good things that the Pennsylvania legislature also recently passed is that if you are awarded a scholarship, so an institutional scholarship, a merit scholarship, and then you get the award letter, it lists, all your scholarships from that college, and then you get like a bunch of outside scholarships. Institutions within Pennsylvania cannot reduce your already offered scholarship. So they cannot reduce your grants, your scholarships that they've already offered you. Okay. The only time that they would do that is if you get so many scholarships that it goes above your budget, your cost of attendance, right? So that's one of the good things about universities in the state of Pennsylvania is that we can't reduce your scholarships now. That used to be something in the past. Private institutions might have reduced your institutional scholarships, might have reduced your merit aid, depending on how many outside scholarships you got. But that no longer applies. Yeah. So don't discount the small ones because they can stack. And yes, $250 may not seem like a huge amount in the grand scheme, but that's going to be your books right there, right? Yeah. If you think about that for the semester. And the other thing I would say is, do not stop the scholarship search once you get accepted. So you're accepted, you're like, I'm good, I'm done. No, apply for scholarships every year. There's so many out there and it can be overwhelming. So what I did many moons ago when I was an undergrad is I would put in my planner, here's the deadline, here's how many there's going to be like, hundreds, but I'll pick 5. This on, February 21st, there are 5 scholarships due then. I'm going to do those 5 scholarships, and then I'll give myself a break maybe pick another deadline and pick another 3 scholarships to do by that date. So, and do that, you know, throughout the year. Don't just stop as soon as you've gotten the acceptance letter.
Yeah, Katrina, just to spend a second on that, because that right on that topic of scholarships, it's always a very important topic, and I talk a lot about that with our families. And you know, you said it perfectly in how I describe with our families. You know, that kind of start smaller and kind of build your way out. That the last slide you just had up, I actually working with you over years. We took a lot of those different recommendations for search engines, and we have them on our counseling center website under college planning and financial aid and scholarships, and that's a nice starting point. And to your point, you're right. You know, I have 9th grade parents, 10th grade parents. You know, even getting into 11th grade, they start to get eager and say, "Oh, Mr. Findor, I'm seeing there's not so much out there for the 9th to 10th and 11th graders, right?" Yes, that's right. But to your point, you're building that capacity for what's coming down the road and getting yourself prepared. I'm seeing a little bit more and more scholarships open up for some juniors, which is interesting. When we do our scholarships, a lot of times from the counseling department, we talk to our families about that. We have a really nice setup through our Naviance program. And when you click on Naviance and you click on college, there's an entire links over there set up, whether it's school specific scholarships you're looking for, national scholarships, and even works our way down closer to the state. But the last thing I'd like to bring up for our families here too, Katrina, when it comes to scholarships, though, it's very important because it's coming up for us. You said it perfectly about, you know, when you're applying for the Coca-Cola scholarship of $10,000, you know, that's there. You have students across the country applying for that. We're opening up on February 27th, and it's on the college planning portion of our website. We're actually opening up our UHS school-based scholarships. And I always tell students, this isn't you competing against kids across the country. This isn't you competing against kids across the state of Pennsylvania. This isn't even kids competing against kids across Chester County. You're only competing against kids here at Unionville for our UHS school-based scholarships. And we have a nice link that outlines all of that on a counseling center website that'll be open up here on February 27th. So thanks for bringing up all the information about scholarships and allowing me to kind of clarify. I appreciate you allowing me to interrupt here.
Oh yeah, no, awesome. That brings me to my final point here is that we've talked about kind of all night this holistic approach, right? Yeah. So that's how I would recommend that you take your scholarship searches, from a holistic approach, right? Because you want to make sure that the things that you're doing in high school, so your clubs, your extracurricular activities, your sports, things like that, those are all resume builders, not just for your admissions essays, but they're also builders for your scholarship essays. So keep those things in mind. So these are my 5 tips for financial aid success. Always look for the free money first. You want to apply now and every year. Know your specific deadlines. Each school may have a specific deadline. The state of Pennsylvania has the May 1st deadline to do the FAFSA. Fill out the FAFSA each and every year, even if you don't think that you're going to get anything, which I hear a lot, and that's fine if you don't think that you're going to get anything from federal aid, but you may be required to do it in order to be eligible for any other type of institutional grants or scholarships. And then always compare your aid offers carefully. And then finally, make sure that you have the money that you need and you know what your bills are going to be before the semester starts, before the bills even come out. You want to know that you have a ballpark figure of what you're working with. And you can always reach out to your financial aid office wherever you plan to go to sit down to meet with a financial aid counselor to discuss anything. So that's pretty much all.
Katrina, this is a fantastic job. I know it's such a difficult topic in that it could be so specific for each family. But when I talk to you and we have these discussions each year, there's always changes, and you're touching on those. And it's really interesting to also see kind of this again the foundational information there across the board. I really appreciate that. Katrina, I got to be honest. I mean, you really cleared a lot up for our families. I pretty much just have one question for you. And again, this is kind of something that you may not see in your experiences, but since you've been to a few different institutions, if you've happened to see this, and I doubt it would happen more so at the state level, but I have parents ask me a lot, hey, Mr. Findora, would it be worth my time, especially for the private institutions, for me I've been accepted to A, B, C school, and I'm on the fence about all of them. Could I know that financial package for each one of those? If they're somewhat similar from a financial standpoint, but I'm getting more money from one than the other, could I contact that particular school that I really want to go to and maybe sway things? I mean, what would your advice be, Katrina, just to kind of wrap things up here? Because I get that question a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. You can contact institutions that are similar. So if you are looking at private schools and you have your heart set on one school, but another school will give you more money, you can send your award letter to the financial aid office and fill out it's based on the institution, but they usually have like a financial aid appeal form that comes out once the award letters come out. Now, in the public sphere, if you send a private school letter to us, we're not even going to look at it. But if you send another public
Okay.
institution to us, we will consider that.
Oh, that's
Same
interesting.
thing
Okay.
with, yeah, like a lot of the private schools, they'll look at the private comparisons,
Sure.
but they won't really look at the public, right?
Yeah.
Because our costs, our aid, everything is so different, but
Yeah.
we will compete within the sphere. So like the private institutions will compete, the public institutions will compete. Now, community colleges, if that's the route you're going, they really don't.
Sure, of course.
When it comes to that, but the traditional four-year institutions, I will say it might be worth it if you do contact the financial aid offices for that.
That's great. Well, Katrina, as always, super impressed. Fantastic job. Thank you very much for your time, for your effort here. Very thorough with everything as always. And I really appreciate you being part of the team here and helping our community out here at Unionville. So thank you very much. As I wrap things up, one last goodbye. I appreciate it. I appreciate it there, Katrina.
Thank you.
Thanks again, and I'm sure as I just said to our other college reps there, the reality of the situation is, as I talk to the community here and I kind of prepare everybody, save the dates here as I wrap things up here. Save the date for March 22nd. March 22nd is going to be our next college planning webinar. It should be a very, very, very interesting, fresh new topic that we're doing this year that we have not done in the past. I plan on putting together a parent panel and a student panel to give some firsthand accounts of the process and what it looks like from very different perspectives of individuals in the community. And I already have some commitments for that, and we already have things set in stone. So I'm looking forward to March 22nd in our next webinar. As always, thank you very much to Justin Webb putting the technology together for tonight. I really appreciate his help on everything and allowing this to happen. Melissa Albrand, Alexa Hessenauer from our counseling department, helping behind the scenes with facilitating things. And again, I can't stress enough to all the families out there. I'm very, very thrilled to be able to say that we receive a lot of positive feedback, but I want to let all of you know we send that feedback link out frequently because I really take to heart anything that you're sharing or anything that you're looking for, because we're constantly trying to improve these webinars in addition to a lot of the positive feedback we've had in the past. So again, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the time. I hope everyone has a good night. And again, any particular questions that you may have that may have been left on the table that are very specific, please reach out to your high school counselor and check out our college counseling website there on the Unionville High School website. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everybody.